Welcome, I am Daisy, your hostess. We're diving into the esoteric content of the Kabbalah. Specifically in this video, the fall of Tetragrammaton and the redemption of Tetragrammaton, as written by JFC Fuller in his book, The Secret Wisdom of the Kabbalah. This book is in the public domain. In the previous videos, we covered some basic background of the Kabbalah, its cosmogony, as well as an overview of good and evil, which was an interesting perspective. Like I've said in previous videos, we approach these content as explorers, not as academics or theologists, more so with curiosity. And by doing this, we give ourselves permission and some wiggle room to reveal and clarify the world that we have constructed and possibly spot something that might help us along our path. As many of you have noticed, the literature that I cover is quite eclectic and varied. I have a fascination for learning and understanding the esoteric side of humanity and sharing it with you. We all can look around and clearly observe the diversity of people that inhabit our planet. It is a grand thing to behold and ponder. The diversity is the beauty, be it primitive peoples or technically advanced civilizations. We can zoom out and choose to see ourselves as a collective conglomerate organism, the beauty of the unity, or zoom in and see the wholeness of the collective represented in the oneness. Before I get into the next chapter, there is a lot to unpack in regards to this next chapters, with the main focus being Tetragrammaton. My first introduction to the word Tetragrammaton was through the esoteric world of tarot, which I'm fascinated with, and it's a system that beautifully weaves together astrology, numerology, and symbolism as an instrument for meditation or divination. These then were introduced with a modern twist in the 1800s by Éliphas Lévi, a 19th century French occultist who synthesized Kabbalistic traditions with the other esoteric systems like Hermeticism and magic, most notably by linking the Kabbalistic tree of life to the tarot cards, as published in his book The Magical Ritual of the Sanctum Regnum, describing the relationship of the 22 cards of the major arcana with the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and the 4 suits of the tarot corresponding to the 4-lettered Hebrew name of God, Tetragrammaton. And here we come and converge back to today's video. The term Tetragrammaton comes from the Greek word meaning 4 letters and refers to the 4 Hebrew consonants attributed as God's personal name, YHWH. Scholars say that the use of these letters likely originated with Proto-Israelites such as the ancient Shasu nomads, an Egyptian name meaning those who move on foot, from the Transjordan region and northern Arabia. Additionally, scholars write that the word Shasu was used by the Egyptians to refer to lawless bandits, nomads, and pastoralists, or people from different Middle East ancient nations. Funny, isn't it, how we can't seem to shake the animal inside the human? To me, this simply demonstrates that even back then, the nature of man to identify or shun anyone that is different from our own culture, even if we're born in the same region. If a group of people look slightly different than us, guess what? We immediately must label it. Anyway, back to our topic here. The earliest written use of the Tetragrammaton's name, Yahweh, is on the Mesha Stele, dating to 840 BCE, discovered in 1868 at Dibon, Jordan, biblical Dibon, the capital of Moab. The inscription of 34 lines, said to be by King Mesha, is the most extensive document ever recorded referring contemporaneously to ancient Israel. Its significance comes from being the earliest extra-biblical reference to Yahweh, YHWH, the God of Israel, and the first reference to the house of David, offering a parallel Moabite perspective to biblical accounts of King Mesha's rebellion against Israel. This, therefore, marks a written point in history when YHWH had become the national deity of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. While the specific word Tetragrammaton does not appear in the King James Bible, though the Hebrew Tetragrammaton, YHWH, is represented in the King James Bible by the capitalized word quote-unquote Lord to honor Jewish tradition. It is in Exodus 3:14, God reveals his name to Moses as I am who I am, which is related to the Tetragrammaton. So as we move through these next chapters, we can sense that through the fall and redemption of Tetragrammaton, there is an esoteric revelation of the principles of creation as seen through these lenses. And this actually kind of goes into connection with creation stories as well. So the fall of Tetragrammaton is describing a mystical concept related to the creation and subsequent spiritual fragmentation of the universe. If you follow through, you might sense that. This is not a reference to the name of God itself, but to the process of cosmic separation and exile from a state of divine unity, and then followed by the redemption of Tetragrammaton, referring to the reunification of the divine name and the restoration of God's complete presence in the world. This concept is tied to the Jewish mystical understanding of the Tetragrammaton, YHVH, as a representation of God's essence and the structure of creation, the cosmic and individual repair. And in this mystical worldview, every act of devotion is a cosmic intervention and restoring creation. To quote the author summarizing a Kabbalistic core concept, quote, all that has been created from the cherubim in the highest firmament down to the tiniest worm that crawls upon the earth lives in Elohim and through Elohim. End quote. That's to say that everything which is, has been, or will be is formed by the divine thought. Therefore, the universe is the symbol of the divine thinker. It is a description of how God functions in the universe. Very much what Dr. tenured professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford University and neuroscientist Andrew David Huberman expresses as he talks about his belief that the intricacies of biology and the universe suggest the presence of a creator. I've left the link of his interview and other links in the description of this video. We are not entering into this debating the authenticity of Hebrew text. We leave that to Mauro Buglino. What we can do is look at the amalgamation of these works and filter what resonates true for us. And on the way, learn a little bit about other people and other beliefs. So with that, I now turn the page. The Secret Wisdom of the Qabbalah by JFC Fuller. Chapter 4. The Fall of Tetragrammaton. The Principles of Creation. When discussing the philosophy of Kabbalah, we touched upon the principles of creation. Here we will return to this subject, for they constitute the foundations of mystic knowledge towards which, as we shall show later on, scientific thought is tending. First, it must be realized that though, in the ordinary use of words, creation conveys to us an idea of springing up, that is, of newness and novelty. To the Kabbalists, it conveys the opposite idea, namely that of descending, obscuring, and grossifying. For instance, no rational being would assert that a work of art was greater than the artist who created it. A statue is an artistic idea materialized. It is of stone, clay, or metal, pure matter, to which has been added an ideal form which emanated from the thoughts of a human being, also fashioned of matter, that is, of flesh, blood, and bone. It was not thought which created the material of the statue, for this existed before the thought arose in the head of the artist. Yet thought did give to the statue its form, and this crystallized thought may live on long after the flesh, blood, and bone of the artist have fallen to dust. Will the artist then have perished? No, not altogether, for he will in part live on in the form of the statue, which perhaps for thousands of years will proclaim his genius to those who look upon it. With the entire world, the entire universe, it is the same, but with this difference, it expresses the totality of the thoughts of the divine thinker. Thought, we have seen, gave it form. Therefore, the universe is God in form and in activity. all that has been created, says the Zohar, from the holy beast, the cherubim, in the highest firmament, down to the tiniest worm that crawls upon the earth, lives in Elohim and through Elohim. That is to say, everything which is, has been, or will be is formed by the divine thought. Therefore, the universe is the symbol of the divine thinker. What is it formed of? What is the material, the void and the formless, the negative and the positive of VHB, Bohu, BHV, and VHU, Tohu, THV, which find their harmony in the darkness? And be it noted that Beth, the first letter of BHV, is the letter of creation, the first letter of Genesis, and that it represents the open mouth, or parted lips, which utter the logoic word. Also that as Tau, the first letter of THHV, is the final letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It completes the utterance, and as its numerical value is 400, it represents 400 Sephiroth of the 4 worlds. Finally, that each word includes a H and a vowel, a feminine and a masculine quantity, and that the numerical values of these 4 letters is 22, the number of letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Consequently, potentially, the names of all things, forms are included in them. These two find their equilibrium in darkness or the black fire. Tohu, we are told, is under the aegis of Shaddai, Bohu under that of Sebaoth, darkness under that of Elohim, spirit under that of Yahweh. There was a strong wind breaking the mountains, but the Lord was not in the wind, because this name was not in it, since Shaddai presides over it through the mystic nature of Tohu. After the wind there was a quaking, but the Lord was not in the quaking, since over it presides the name of Zebaoth, through the mystic nature of Bohu, which is called the quaking Rosh, because it quakes continually. After the quaking there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire, because over it presides the name Elohim from the side of darkness. And after the fire there was a small still voice, and here at last was found the name Yahweh. This small still voice represents the Shin emerging from YHSH, which by turning the darkness into a luminous mirror enabled Yahweh, YHVH, to be reflected upon it. The only was the balance between the former and the formless established. As the divine spark scintillated forth, he caused a wind to blow from above against a wind that blew from below. From the shock of the meeting of these two winds, a drop emerged and rose from the depths of the abyss. This drop united the winds, and from the union of these winds, the world was born. A simulacrum of Elohim. Who? These, in which the form of every atom represents a divine idea. Or we may try to understand it in another way. The indivisible point or supreme point sends forth a light of such transparency, limpidity, and subtlety that it penetrates everywhere. Around the point, the penetration of its own light forms a ring or a palace. The light of the supreme point being of an inconceivable brilliance, the light of the palace, which is inferior to it, looks like a dark circle around it. But the light of the first palace, though it may seem dark by comparison with the point itself, is yet of an immense splendor, which gives off another ring or palace, forming a sort of envelope around the first one, so that emanating from the supreme point, all the degrees of creation are but envelopes, the one for the other. The envelope of the superior degree forms the brain of the degree next to it. Here is presented to us a system of worlds within worlds. First, there's the world, or expanse of nothingness, then the aware, or ether, next the hour, or light, then 10 Sephirotic rings of light, one grosser than the other, until the last is composed of air, fire, water, earth, and spirit, or Yod, He, Vav, He, and Shin. in which the form is visible because of the existence of the spirit. By the very cry, Yeh-Or, let there be light, was the world created, and Yeh is a combination of Yod and H, Y, the Great Father, and the Great Mother, the eternal complements. Finally, it may be asked, what was the reason for the creation? And the Kabbalist answers, this is not a rightful question because God is beyond reason. To him, omnipotence supposes authority, necessity, and liberty, and through necessity the universe came into being in the form of authority and liberty, law and free will. Necessity is in fact the divine mystery which is beyond all reason. It exists. It is I am, the secret of Elohim. The experimental worlds. Before the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters and cast the divine shadow on the formless void, we are told again and again in the Zohar that experimental worlds had existed and had been destroyed on account of their imperfection. We read, before the aged of the aged, the Ein Sof, the concealed of the concealed, expanded into the form of king, the crown of crowns, Kether, there was neither being nor end. He hewed and incised forms and figures into it in the following manner. He spread before him a cover, and carved therein kings, worlds, and marked out their limits and forms, but they could not preserve themselves. Therefore it is written, these are the kings that reigned in the land of Edom, before there reigned any king over the children of Israel. Genesis 36, verse 31. And this refers to the primordial kings and primordial Israel. All these were imperfect. He therefore removed them and let them vanish, till he finally descended himself to this cover and assumed a form. But though they vanished, they were not annihilated, because nothing perisheth in this world, not even the breath which issued from the mouth. For this, like everything else, has its place and destination, and the Holy One, blessed be his name, turns it into service. These worlds were formless because the sacred aged had not as yet assumed his form, the king and queen as opposite sexes, and the master was not yet at his work. By the word master is meant Adam Kadmon, the human form which deity must of necessity assume. It was therefore after the destruction of the worlds of the kings of Edom that the latens deitas was able to assume a balanced form in the fourth and material world. Thus the Zohar says, the Holy One, blessed be he, created and destroyed several worlds before the present one was made, and when the last work was nigh completion, all the things of this world, all the creatures of the universe, in whatever age they were to exist, before ever they entered into this world, were present before God in their true form. Thus are the words of Ecclesiastes to be understood. What was, shall be, and what has been done, shall be done. This strange story is both obscure and perplexing because it is difficult to attribute imperfection to God. But to the Kabbalist it is otherwise, for the no thing evolves into the something, the who, and necessity creeps in, for necessity is impossible without a choice, and a choice demands the existence of opposing forces, the male and the female, or the positive and the negative. We are told somewhat mysteriously, before the forms of the Holy King, the Atik were prepared. It built worlds and made forms for their preservation, but the female principle was not joined yet with the male principle. Therefore they could not exist until this was done. Until this balance was established, Adam Kadmon could not appear and replace the Adam Belial of the unbalanced world and the averse tree of life from which the races of the Gentiles are sprung. It would therefore appear that the reason for the creation of the kings of Edom was to account for the world being peopled with races under then that of Israel. Adam Kadmon. On several occasions already have we made mention of Adam Kadmon. He is called by various names such as the primordial man, the archetypal man, microprosopos, the man of the east, the shadow of the invisible macrocosm, the pre-existing soul of Messiah, the cosmic sun, etc., etc. Strictly speaking, he is the form, not the spirit, of deity in Aziluth. Nevertheless, he is also the emanations of this form in the remaining three worlds. Consequently, there are four Adam Kadmons. As regards the first of these, Isaac Meyer writes, the Kabbalah shows the existence of four atoms, or rather three continuations of the upper heavenly atom. I, the perfect upper heavenly atom of the Atzil-Attic world, the world of emanation. It is androgenic and the sole occupant of that world. It is thought of as a manifestation of the deity in the divine Duyukna, shadow, or an undefined phantom shade of the Zelem, image, which the earthly man in the flesh has never seen. It is a perfect jur, or prototype, to the second and subsequent atoms. In the upper heavenly man is the perfect holy nefesh, instincts, ruah, reason, neshama, moral consciousness, haya, animal vitality, and yehida, personality, merged in combination yet existing quasi-separately. Here is also the content of the upper 10 Sephiroth. It answers to the intellectual, the brain, and is in the upper inner emanated heaven. It also answers to the holy upper neshama, soul. As regards the next three, Meyer is more than unreliable, for he is misleading. Consequently, we will rely on our own interpretation. Each is a shadow or lower appearance of the one above, the second being attributed to the Briatic world, Metatron, and the Ruah, the third to the Yetziratic world, Samael, and the Nefesh, the fourth to the Asiatic world, Yahweh, YHVH, and the Haya, or Hayya, the supernal man of Genesis 1:26. Together they represent the grand personality or great universal man, the synthesis of Adam Kadmon in the four worlds. In the world of Asya, Adam Kadmon is the symbolical reflection of God, not on the illuminated void, but on the mist of matter, and by this reflection is the earthly Adam created. He is androgynous like his greater prototype in Atziluth, being both male and female, and therefore he possesses the power to create and to destroy life, that is, to exhale it and breathe it in. Thus we see evolved that mysterious and mystical order of revolution. First there is God, or the gods, energy finding its source in the Ayin. Finally, in the reflection of God is the world emanated, and from the earth emerges man in the form of conscious matter. God in himself is unity. The world is duality, and man is trinity in unity. And as the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, so does the intelligence of man move upon the face of the fluxes of matter, and through equilibrium it seeks loss of its identity by stilling them in the Spirit of God. When this is accomplished, then will the magic mirror of illusion vanish into the no-thingness out of which it was evolved. In the account of the creation in Genesis, the androgenic man appears on the sixth day, that is, at the end of the creation, because he symbolizes its totality and completion, and 6 is the number of the great work. 666 being also its number in the vital, intellectual, and spiritual planes, the vow extended from Malkuth to Kether. In the second account of the creation of the androgenic man is formed of the dust of the ground and the Lord God, that is the Tetragrammaton Elohim, and not merely Elohim as in the first account, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, that is the Nefesh, and man became a living soul. Next, the Neshama, Eden, the garden of the intellect, is planted, and man is put into it, but is oblivious of the knowledge of good and evil, because as yet he possesses no Ruah, that is power of judgment, and it is only after the temptation of Eve that the Ruah is established and the androgenic man becomes fully active. Until this transformation takes place, it would appear that the androgenic man is only occultly the shadow of Tetragrammaton. He is not Yahweh, HVHY, but YVY, IV. For the Zohar informs us that God brought them, man shaped for this world and man shaped for the future world, under the aegis of his own name by shaping the two eyes like the letter Yod and the nose between them like the letter Vav. At once we see the connection for IV equals 26, the numerical value of Tetragrammaton. And further, as we will show later on, by splitting one of the two Yodin into H and H, 10 into 5 and 5, the inserting the vowel between them, we obtain HVH, Hava, Eve. Again, as already explained, the two Yodin and the vowel are the members of the letter Aleph, the first letter of the mystical creative alphabet. We are also told in the Zohar that when the first man was created, God gathered the dust from all the four sides of the world and spread upon her a soul of life from the holiness above. That this soul was the neshama, which, like the mystery above, comprised 3 degrees: nefesh, ruah, neshama. The third corresponds to the Briatic world, the second to the Yetziratic, and the first to the Asiatic, the body of man being the mystical and magical Merkabah. It is also to be noted that the neshama has 3 divisions. The highest is the Yehida, the middle, and the Haya, the last and third, the neshama, properly to say. They manifest themselves in the Mashshaba, thought, Zelem, phantom of the image, Zurath, prototypes, and Diyukna, shadow of the phantom image. The Demuth, likeness or similitude, is a lower manifestation. Such was the organization of the great vitality, the Adam Kadmon of Asiya, who for 130 years had intercourse with female spirits, begetting the evil powers of the world, powers which are endowed with life but not with immortality until they have been set in conflict with the good and have become equilibrated. To effect this transmutation demanded an angelic race of men and consequently the creation of the angelic mother. The creation of Eve. In the 2nd chapter of Genesis, we are told that Tetragrammaton Elohim took a rib from the body of Adam and from it fashioned woman, the passive or feminine essence of the archetypal man. The Kabbalistic interpretation is as follows. The rib is the letter Yod, which when removed from the 4 letters Yod He Vav He leaves He Vav He, or Eve. The actual transmutation from Yod Vav Yod to Yod He Vav He we have already described. The Yod, as it will be remembered, also symbolizes the 10 Sephiroth of the Yetziratic world, which are reflected in the Asiatic world in the form of the Garden of Eden, which mystically is the garment of God. The Yod being extracted, the mystical Eve is closed, that is, the vision of the Yetziratic tree of life is cut off from the world of Asiya. Consequently, though Adam and Eve perceived that they were naked, they were not ashamed. That is, they could not perceive the nakedness of the Asiatic world, because the Yetziratic vision having vanished, there was no comparison, duality left to judge it by. They were in fact bereft of all power of directly perceiving the Shekinah or supernal light. There is yet another mystery included in the letter Yod. Its hieroglyphic is the human head. When opened, it symbolizes the microcosm. The 4 fingers, the material elements Yod, He, Vav, Yeh, and the thumb, the spiritual element Shin. When closed, it symbolizes unity, the egg out of which all things emanate. As its numerical value is 10, it also symbolizes the 2 hands, the erect or good pentagram and the inverted or evil pentagram. 10 is a combination of unity and 0. Therefore, mystically, there is a relationship between Yod and Aleph, and Yod and what is beyond Aleph, the beginning. The numerical value of Aleph is 1, the 2 arms of which convey the meaning of as above, so beneath, In this letter, it symbolized the whole of creation. The top arm is deity, the crossbar, the waters, motionless as zero, and the lower arm, the reflection of the higher arm on the waters. Thus we obtain from A, or 1 divided by 0 divided by 1, or 10 divided by 0 divided by 10. The first equals 2, the second 20, and Yod spelt in full, Yod Vav Daleth, equals 20. Therefore the 2 together equal 22. That is the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which constitute the paths of the tree of life, and out of which, with the Sephiroth, the universe is mystically formed. Finally, as Yod represents the 10 Sephiroth and the 22 paths, it is the symbol of all things, concentrated in the primordial point. In the 3rd chapter of Genesis, the fall of man is described. To the Kabbalist, it depicts the first step in the redemption of Tetragrammaton. For unless Eve had tempted Adam, good and evil could never have been harmonized. The apple is the Sephiroth of Yhwh, the foundation and the source of generative and regenerative power. We have described how evil, really activity, emanated out of God in the form of Tetragrammaton. This being so, according to Kabbalistic philosophy, out of evil must good or God evolve. For as above, so beneath, and as beneath, so above, are the laws of Kabbalistic inversion. Just as the serpent of Kronos devoured its tail, so must evil, in the form of the satanic serpent, devour itself. This magical operation of activity eating up activity in the central principle in the Messianic act, which we will examine more fully in the next chapter. Here we will restrict ourselves to a few introductory remarks. The Messianic redemption. To begin with, there is no serpent, then one serpent. Lastly, 2 forms of one serpent, that is, a serpent possessing 2 complementary energies, which when balanced cause its immediate destruction. These 2 energies or powers are called Metatron and Samael, and in the name of Tetragrammaton, they are symbolized by the Yod and the Vav, the serpent coiled up or passive and the serpent erect or active. The first represents the creative energy and the second actual movement or change. These 2 serpents are the guardians of those forces which man calls good and evil. They are, as we have already mentioned, symbolized by Yakin and Boaz, the pillars of Solomon's temple, and flow into Kether through the 50 gates of Bina, 50 being the numerical value of KL, LK, which means all, or the understanding of all. Moses failed to open the 50th of these gates. Had he done so, he would have become the Messiah of Israel. When the Messiah does come, the sabbatic millenary will be accomplished. All Israel will be blessed, and will become one nation in the Lord. That is to say, this world will be inhabited solely by the chosen people. There is the energy of the serpent of Genesis, NCHSH, Nachash, and the energy of the brazen serpent, which healed the afflicted Israelites, MSHICH, Messiah, Mashiach. Both have the same numerical values, namely 3, 5, 8. Consequently, when one is subtracted from the other, the result is 0, that is, deliverance from both good and evil. In order to understand this, we will repeat it again. Good is a means of balancing out evil, and evil a means of balancing out good. Neither is desirable in itself except in the material world, which cannot exist without them. Equally, the spiritual world cannot be entered as long as they exist. Consequently, their adverseness is purely relative to the spiritual world. Further on in this book, we will show that the power of using either is drawn from the same source, Shin, Shekinah, astral light, ether, electricity, whatever name it may be called by, and to understand the use of this force, yet never to be obsessed by it, is to trample on the head of the serpent, and so re-establish the Shin in the body of Tetragrammaton, and formulate the Messiah, the incarnate word which, when disincarnated, caused the Asiatic world to be. In brief, this is the central doctrine of the Kabbalistic redemption. Yet so dangerous did this doctrine appear, should it be divulged to the uninitiated, that to safeguard it, it was locked away in a jumble of symbols, names, figures, and cryptograms which are frequently contradictory. The danger was that this philosophy not only harmonized good and evil, but maintained that all goodness proceeds from evil. Mystically, this means a return of man to God, but by the ignorant it might easily be interpreted as meaning the doing of evil for the sake of spiritual gain. We will repeat it again. To the Hebrew mystic, the God of Genesis, Tetragrammaton Elohim, is not the ultimate God, or Ayin, the incomprehensible, no thing, but its lowest emanation, matter or grossness personified, a reflection of a reflection 4 times removed. Yet this emanation is the only one which can be comprehended by man, who in this microcosmic life can only struggle forward through the clash between passivity and activity, which are both good and evil according to the circumstances, that in according to necessity. Necessity is divinity in hiding. Authority is the divinity of the religious order, and liberty is divinity in man. The establisher of authority is the Messiah. These mystical philosophers fully recognize the necessity for original sin, because the world is of Satan and man is of the world. Man is born in sin, not the sin of Adam's disobedience, carnal or physical sin, but in the mystical and spiritual sin of Tetragrammaton's fall. The blame was thrown upon Adam, the man, not out of deference to the deity, but to conceal this potent secret from the uninitiated. In order to redeem the sin in which all mankind is born, it was necessary that a passive-active emanation be created to balance the active-passive satanic force. This emanation was to be the Messiah of the world, on whose advent equilibrium would be reestablished. This supreme cancellation was the one hope of Israel. End of chapter. Chapter 5. The Redemption of Tetragrammaton. Symbols of the Messianic Act. As we have shown in the last chapter, the Messianic Act consists of a transubstantiation of the material into the spiritual, that is, of the Asiatic world into the Yetziratic. In other words, a reversal of the whole process of creation. In the everyday meaning of the words, its object is not to establish law and order, or the happiness of mankind, or to substitute good for evil, but diametrically the opposite, namely to produce anarchy and discontent of so potent a nature that the complementary forces in this world will annihilate one another through the intensity of their friction. To illustrate this by a scientific example, suppose that the universe was composed of the gases oxygen and hydrogen, which had been created by electrolyzing water. Then the Messianic Act would consist in destroying this universe so that it might be replaced by the water out of which it had been formed. To carry this illustration further, suppose that the 4 worlds of the Kabbalistic cosmology are represented by ice, water, steam, and gas, and that their final state is called electricity, or complete dematerialization, no-thingness. Then the ultimate object of the Messianic Act is to reestablish this nirvana. Symbolically, this potent mystery is depicted in the Eucharist, or High Mass, in which the bread and wine are transmuted into the body and blood of Christ, that is, matter into God. As we have already stated, it was on account of the potency of this mystery that it was so heavily shrouded. Here existed an idea which could either recreate divinity or plunge mankind into still deeper depths of devilry. It could exalt man to supreme genius or cast him down into complete madness. Its potency was so stupendous that it may be compared to atomic energy in the physical world, for as above, so beneath. It followed that its destructive force was as great as its creative force, which would be used depended entirely upon the will of the user. Therefore, it is the will which is the Redeemer. Man, the instrument of redemption. Though we cannot consciously transcend our reason, we can transcend the realized and gain knowledge of things which we cannot explain or even understand. For instance, we know that the birth of a child must be preceded by union between the opposite sexes, but we cannot explain how this union results in the creation of life, or how it is that the child inherits instincts, talents, and defects, or possesses genius, or is born an idiot. Here we are faced by mysteries which lead us deeper and deeper into unconscious realms, that is, into realms beyond our reason. And when we enter these realms, all we can do is to speak symbolically. Instead, if we turn from the body to the soul, supposing it to be the bride of God, and God the bridegroom, we may consciously realize that union has taken place. But when the spiritual child is born, we cannot explain the divine process of creation, and the more we attempt to explain it, the more obscure become our symbols, every one of which is in fact a lie, that is a misrepresentation of the unconscious or superconscious to the conscious. To the Kabbalist, as there are two principles in every human being, the active and the passive, because of the law of inversion, there must also be two principles within the divinity. To him, the great work of redemption is not to redeem ourselves or to be redeemed by the divine power, but to redeem Tetragrammaton, the fallen god of the Yetziratic world. The active principle in man must unite with the passive principle in YHVH Yahweh, and the passive principle in man must submit to union with the active principle in Yahweh. From this dual marriage between man and divinity will emanate the child or Messiah, a complete integration of man in God and of God in man. As through the divine fall the divinity became manifest in Adam Kadmon, accordingly must man emulate him and through his own transfiguration destroy the material form of consciousness so that the mirror of illusions may dissolve. Thus will divinity be redeemed by the destruction of the divine image, and the ineffable Shin will be reabsorbed into the body of Tetragrammaton. Man must suffer for God, just as in Christian theology, which in so many ways inverts Hebrew theology. Christ must suffer for man so that God may become the perfect one. Thus the crucifixion of mankind is the necessary consequent of the divine fall. Man is, therefore, the implement of the redemption of God. This is the secret the Qabbalah hints at but never clearly expresses. The accomplishment of the Messianic act. In the second chapter of Genesis, Tetragrammaton created Adam Kadmon in his own form. He took dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Next, Adam was placed in the Garden of Eden, that is in Malkuth, which is magically divided by 4 rivers. This means that man, or the humanity of Adam, becomes the Shin, surrounded by the 4 elements or the 4 magical powers of courage, will, knowledge, and silence. In the center of the garden is planted a tree, symbolic of the living force, from the root of which spring 3 trunks. As already explained in a former chapter, the central one leads to the life supernal, and the remaining 2 include the life infernal. All 3, springing from one root, Malkuth, find their unity in Kether. Only by eating of the fruits of the infernal branches and digesting these fruits can Adam compel the central trunk to grow, and only when its topmost branches are climbed will Adam realize the non-existence of good and evil, and discover the world of spirit and clothe himself in immortality. The relationship between Tetragrammaton and humanity, the flesh cells, so to speak, of Adam Kadmon, creates the potentialities of Satan, the demon hordes. And as Tetragrammaton is possessed of a horror, a void, when he contemplates the loss of his identity in order to maintain its secret, he forbids Adam to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because its fruits are death. That is, they lead to passivity, the magical recoil which threatens the active existence of Satan. Next, Eve, the female counterpart of Adam, is formed, and though mystically the man and the woman are created in one form, face to face, allegorically the creation of Eve precedes that of Adam. For allegorically, the positive forces of life, the masculine, emanate from the negative forces, the feminine. By separating the Yod from Tetragrammaton, Y, H, VH, and thus creating Eve, a stupendous active and consequently demoniacal force is released. For Eve is the mother of all living things, including the mother of God, the female or negative force of Jah, YH, the H of which is ever seeking to reunite with the Yod. In its lower aspect, Yod represents microcosmic man. In its higher, it represents the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. As man is a trinity in unity, inhibited by a gleam of the supernal Shin, the Shin which, volatilizing into light, enabled Tetragrammaton to become visible, so also is the Yod threefold in nature. It represents not only the pillars of severity, mercy, and mildness, but also formation, reformation, and transformation, activity, passivity, and equilibrium, and good, evil, and deliverance. Thus, it is not one Yod, but three Yodin, which to unite must climb the three trunks of the inseparable trees, and, interlacing in Kether, the crown, reformulate the letter Shin, a trinity in unity. Thus will it deliver back to Tetragrammaton the power he lost in his fall from the world of Yetzirah. Such is the accomplishment of the Messianic act. The integration of the disintegrated. Thus far, the mystery of the Yod, the positive force of Yah, YH. Next, as to Eve, who being possessed of the negative force, the H, has upset the balance of equilibrium. In the center of the name is Eve, is the active and virile Vo, the subtle serpent of the 3rd chapter of Genesis. It is the positive quality of the messianic force and is consequently an evil which creates good. When we look at the position of this letter and remember the significance of those on its right and left, we at once notice how abnormal its place is. On the left is its natural partner, the first He, or daughter, its wedded wife. On the right is its mother, now widowed, because she is separated from the Yod, and yet forced into an unnatural union with her son. She is ever striving to reunite with the Yod, and consequently Eve is tempted to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For God doth know that the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. The passive forces symbolized by women listened to the lamentation of the primal H, and then seeing that it was a tree to be desired to make one wise, that is leading from the 50th gate of the feminine Bina to the masculine Hokmah, even plucked of its fruit and handed it to Adam, the active forces. At once the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. That is, that an abyss separated the supernal triad from the infernal heptad. Thus they became conscious of the difference between YH and VH, Y and V. And in this consciousness was reflected the unity of these two, Satan, as symbolized by their nakedness. As the Egyptian hierophants, when they discovered that the earth gravitated round the sun, hid away this knowledge because it revealed the law of attraction and repulsion, the law of creation. So now did man and woman veil the knowledge of the conjunction of the Vav and the H, which is but a reflection of the union of the Yod and the H, by means of aprons, that is, by turning this knowledge into a mystery. No sooner were the mysteries hidden than the eternal opposites, the man and the woman, heard the voice of Tetragrammaton walking in the garden. It is the primal light, Shin, formulated by the mystic union of Yod and H, Jah and the V, and Yhwh. As they heard it, they hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God. When questioned, the active force Yhwh accuses the passive force Yhwh, and Jah curses the serpent, the messianic force, and assumes his full satanic form by putting enmity into the heart of woman and sorrow into the life of man. Then he clothes them in animal desires, which are symbolized by the coats of skins. That this is the voice of the fallen Samael of Yetzirah, there can be no doubt, because Tetragrammaton says to Eve, "Thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee." In other words, the passive shall be subservient to the active, which means that equilibrium cannot be established. Lastly, Tetragrammaton acknowledges the active force by saying, "Behold, the man is become as one of us, the Elohim, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat and live forever." Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden, to till the ground from whence he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims and a flaming sword, which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. Herein is hidden a profound mystery. The man alone is cast out of Eden, but not so the woman. The final Yhwh remains in the garden of mystery. The vow is cast outside. This separation at once disintegrates Tetragrammaton. The Yod becomes the tree of life, the primal Yhwh, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the cherubim, the material aspects of Yod, He, Vah, and the flaming sword, the Shin. Thus, Tetragrammaton is disintegrated, and there is separation everywhere. As with Osiris, the great work now consists in reuniting the fragments, the vow, or creative phallus, being cast out of the garden into the world. The vow must unite with the Yhwh, for when it does so, in accordance with the magical law of inversion, necessity, the Yod will unite with the Yhwh, and the Shin, the flaming sword, will be plunged into the heart of Tetragrammaton. Then will the cherub of earth, which is the unity of the forces of the remaining three cherubim, be sacrificed. That is, materiality will vanish. The trees of life and of good and evil will dissolve into one. And as this unity takes form, not only will Tetragrammaton be reestablished, but simultaneously will become Yod He Shin Vah He, HVWHY, the Messiah. Then will the world of Asya vanish into the ecstasy of Yetzirah. Matter will become pure form, that is, a mathematical conception, a thought. The creation of hell. Though the world of Asya is ruled by the inverse Samael, Tetragrammaton despiritualized, and is consequently the realm of demoniacal forces, it is not hell as conceived by the Kabbalist, for hell is the reflection or shadow of this world, that is, the abode of active forces turned upside down, the chaos which has to be stilled in order that Shin, the Shekinah, or divine majesty can be perfectly reflected. With the disintegration of Tetragrammaton, we sink into the carnal or mundane aspect of the mystery, the immediate consequences of this disruption being the birth of love and power, which before were united in a close embrace. The first is the feminine or passive quality in humankind, the Venus force, and the second the active and masculine quality, the Mars force. Mystically, their separation is evil, because it causes striving to reunite. But humanly, these qualities are not wicked in themselves, though they may become sinful, for out of love can emerge lust and hatred, and out of power, fear and cruelty. The demoniac can consequently become the diabolic. The disruption of Tetragrammaton, which is necessary for the redemption of Tetragrammaton, is followed by the story of Cain and Abel. The conflict between power and love. The Venusian and Martian forces in life are divided against each other, life being the synthesis of these two, and the mystical quality of evil emanates as common mundane wickedness, which leads to murder, the destruction of life, not its transformation. Later on, this wickedness is followed by the magical prostitution of evil, or the act of magical incest, through the intermingling of the sons of God, the demoniac powers engendered by the disruption of Tetragrammaton, with the daughters of men, the carnal lust of humankind. Here is symbolized a process of leveling down, a carnal communism, and not of rising up, and the result is the establishment of black magic, the earth being peopled by mighty men, or despots. Why not white magic? Because the sons of God, the above, came down to the daughters of men, the below, that is, light is absorbed by darkness. Thus mankind sank into the Qliphoth, the reflection of the world of Asya upon the chaos of human passions, and hell is created, the materialized mental pit. Thus also it came about that the world became corrupt and filled with violence, and to redeem it, it was necessary to destroy it, except for Noah and those in the ark. Noah was, however, far from perfect. Consequently, we find that after the deluge he profanes the mysteries, and he drank of the wine, and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. And his son Canaan, divulging this profanation, is cursed. Thus magic, in spite of the repentance of Tetragrammaton, continued to grow until the repopulated would cry, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name." That is an object of worship, for they had a crafty design to rid themselves of the supreme power and to transfer his glory to another. The inner meaning of the Tower of Babel is that any attempt to possess the secrets of heaven in order to divulge them to the uninitiated on earth must lead to misunderstanding and anarchy, a confusion of tongues, that is, of false symbols. A universal pentacle cannot be constructed for the unpurified multitudes, for the multitudes can only comprehend parables. We have now descended a long way in the hierarchy of evil. From the divine we have touched bottom in the magical, and yet all we have explained is included in the words of the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. That which is above is like that which is below, and that which is below is like that which is above, for the operations of the wonders of the one thing. To deny hell, writes Éliphas Lévi, is also to deny heaven. Then he says, seeing that, according to the most exalted interpretation of the great Hermetic dogma, hell is the equilibrating reason of heaven, for harmony results from the analogy of contraries, quod superius sicut quod inferius. Superiority presupposes inferiority. The depth determines the height, and to fill up the valleys is to efface mountains. So also to take away shadows would be to destroy light, as this is only visible by the graduated contrast of darkness and day. A universal obscurity would be produced by all dazzling brilliance. The very existence of color in light is due to the presence of shadow. It is the triple alliance of day and night, the luminous image of dogma, the light made shadow, and the Savior is the Word made man. All this rests on the same law, which is the first law of creation, the one absolute law of nature, being that of distinction and harmonious balancing of opposite forces in universal equilibrium. The source of Messianic power. As the creation of the world was out of chaos, so must its destruction, which carries with it its spiritual resurrection, be through chaos. Such is the simple logic of the Qabbalah. As God is the consciousness of the macrocosm, so is man the consciousness of the microcosm. Such is the simple mystery of the Qabbalah. In the human world, man is a God knowing good and evil, yet he is also the son of the God of the natural world, the creator of good and evil. As consciousness has been precipitated from the source of all things, so is it man's lot to expand his atom of consciousness until it fills eternity and merges once again into the source from where it emanated. Little by little, in this upward evolution, are all things intellectualized and in consequence destroyed. Thus the unknown becomes the known and creates to exist because its knowability is death to its mystery. That is to say, it is bereft of opposition to the consciousness of man. Thus the search for knowledge is an unending campaign against duality, in which conquest deprives the conquered of its activity, its opposition, which in man is shadowed for it as ignorance. A void is created, and over it the spirit, Shekinah, in man moves and re-spiritualizes the gross incarnation of Tetragrammaton, and so formulates the Messiah. The laboratory of the devil, Satan of the Qliphoth, is the heart of man. Herein are all things human conceived and ordered. Mystically, this heart is the ark which rode out the terrors of the flood, just as the Shin rode out the terrors of the darkness which was upon the face of the deep. The timber it is built of is cut from the branches of the tree of life. In it is carried the cubic stone of the wise, the cornerstone of the Kabbalistic temple, the divine form of Adam Kadmon, the apex of which is the letter Yod, and at the corners of whose triangular base stand the letters H, Vav, H, and in whose center, unseen from outside, is the letter Shin. This letter, as we have already explained, symbolizes, among other things, the crucifixion of Christ. Christ between the aggressive and passive thieves. As Christ expires, his soul is liberated, and the veil of the temple, the pyramid, is rent in the midst. The three flames, or Yodin, of the letter Shin represent the Od, Aur, and Ob, the active, equilibrating, and passive forces of life, a trinity in unity. The Messianic act, or great work, consists in freeing the hidden Shin from the elemental pyramid in which it is imprisoned. Then the four elements vanish, and the splendor of the Shekinah enwraps like a coal of light the divine child, the Messiah. From this esoteric doctrine, it will be seen that the Messiah does not come from outside. He does not descend upon the pyramid. In place, he comes from inside and dissolves the pyramid. The Christian idea of the Son of God descending from heaven to save the world is in fact the Kabbalistic idea upside down. For all men, or according to the Hebrews, all the chosen people are sons of God, particles of divinity, atoms of spirit, and when all these atoms unite in one spiritual ecstasy, the Messiah is born. For he is the integration of the totality of spirit in mankind, not a spark descending into darkness, but darkness dissolving into illimitable light. From the active to the formal, from the formal to the creative, from the creative to the archetypal, and thence back into the no-thingness, the source and the end of all things. Such is the complete Messianic hypostasis. End of chapter. Before you head out, do hit that like button. If you have any friends and family members that enjoy this type of content, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and join me at the next video as we bring this to a close with the following chapters that will cover the source of mystic power and the anatomy of Illuminism, all in the secret wisdom of the Kabbalah.